The drill instructor's laugh cracked across the firing line just as Elena Beck lifted the rifle into position, and for a split second the entire range seemed to hold its breath. "You think you'll hit anything with that frame?" he snapped, loud enough for every recruit to hear. A few of them grinned. One of them actually stepped back and clapped like it was a joke. Elena did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the target, her jaw still, her hands steady, her breathing slow enough to be counted. The next shot would decide whether they sent her off the line in humiliation or let her stay. If she missed, the laughter would harden into something worse. If she hit, they would all have to live with the fact that they had been wrong about her from the start. The rifle was too heavy for the way they looked at her, too serious for the way they had decided to dismiss her, and when she adjusted her grip, the fabric of her sleeve pulled back just enough to reveal a small black tattoo coiled around a bullet near her wrist. Colonel Stein, standing near the back of the platform with his hands behind his back, stopped so abruptly that even his posture changed. His face lost color. Elena saw none of it. She only noticed the wind shift by a fraction, the grass bending near the berm, the kind of tiny movement most people never saw. She took one measured breath, then another, and fired. The crack of the shot cut through the range. Downrange, the target snapped, and the center ring disappeared under a clean, exact hit. No one spoke. The drill instructor's grin vanished. Elena lowered the rifle only halfway, because the target was not the only thing that had changed. A second target was already being rolled into place, and this one was smaller, farther out, meant for the recruits who wanted to prove they belonged. The instructor stared at the first hole, then at her, then barked. Again. Same distance. Elena nodded once, but she didn't lift the rifle right away. Her fingers tightened around the stock for one quiet second, and when she finally raised it again, she was not looking at the target anymore. She was looking past it, as if the range itself had become a memory she was trying not to enter. The recruits around her stopped smiling. One of them shifted his feet and said nothing. Another folded his arms, suddenly uncertain. Then Colonel Stein took one step forward and said in a voice too low for the line to hear, "Don't touch that mark." Elena's eyes flicked to him for the first time, and in that brief glance there was no pride, no surprise, only a tired warning. She looked back downrange, but the second shot did not come. Instead, she reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and closed her fingers around something small and metallic, something she had been hiding since the moment she arrived at base. When she pulled it free, the morning light flashed across a worn dog tag, and Stein's expression changed completely. He knew exactly what he was looking at. Then the loudspeakers over the range crackled to life, and a voice from the command post called out one name over the entire base. "Black Viper is confirmed on site. Lock down the line. What do you do when the floor is about to give way under your feet?" The command post's voice had barely faded when the first change hit the range for real. A red line snapped alive across the main gate, and two MPs stepped in front of the firing lane, rifles low but ready, cutting off every exit. No one moved. Even the recruits who had been smirking a moment ago stood frozen with their hands half raised, as if the air itself had turned heavy. Colonel Stein did not look at them. He looked only at Elena's dog tag, then at the black snake inked near her wrist, then past her shoulder as another voice crackled from the loudspeakers ordering a full security hold on all live exercises. Elena slid the tag back inside her jacket without a word. She did not reach for the rifle again. Instead, she lowered it carefully, turned 1 inch to the side, and checked the line of recruits behind her as if the crisis had already become someone else's problem to solve. "Eyes off the gate," she said quietly, not loud enough to be a command, but sharp enough that 3 nearby trainees obeyed before anyone else spoke. One of the range officers started protesting that the session was compromised, that the weapons needed to be locked immediately, that nobody should touch anything until command clarified the alert. Elena was already moving. She set the rifle down, walked to the nearest bench, and took the magazine apart with fast, practiced hands. Not to show off. To make sure nothing on that line could misfire if the lockdown dragged on. Her calm forced the others to choose between watching her or wasting time, and most of them found themselves watching. Stein saw it too. He stepped closer, but Elena was already scanning the field, following the tiny shifts that others missed. One target cable frayed near the base, one safety light blinking irregularly, One nervous recruit, standing too close to the equipment cart with a loaded chamber he had forgotten to clear. "Move him back," she said. The recruit bristled at being corrected until the cart rolled a few inches and the loose strap caught the edge of a power box. The box sparked once, then died. A ripple moved through the line. The lockdown had not just shut the gate, it had just cut half the range's power. The loudspeakers clicked again, this time with a new order. All personnel were to report their status and remain in place until a sweep cleared the facility. That should have made things simpler. Instead, it made everything worse. Every minute now mattered. Every mistake would be written down, and every weapon left unsecured would become someone's liability. Elena crouched beside the dead power box, opened the panel with a glance, and traced the burnt relay with the tip of her finger. She did not speak for a long moment. Then she reached into the tool pouch on the bench, pulled out a spare fuse, and replaced it with such quiet certainty that the nearest technician stopped arguing mid-sentence. The lights along the far fence came back in a thin, unstable flicker. It solved one problem instantly and revealed another. On the monitor mounted by the command post, a fresh alert flashed over the base map. Unauthorized movement at the South Service Road. Stein's head snapped up. Elena was already looking there, too. And as the MPs turned toward the gate, a second vehicle rolled into view beyond the fence, dark and unmarked, slowing like it knew exactly where to stop. At the service road, the unmarked vehicle rolled to a stop just beyond the fence line, and the driver did not step out right away. The base had gone quiet in that unnerving way that meant everyone was listening, but nobody wanted to be the first to move. Colonel Stein took one step toward the gate. Then another younger officer moved in front of him, trying to take control. "Nobody opens that fence," he snapped, eyes fixed on Elena, as if she had somehow caused the entire day to collapse around them. "You stay back until we know who you are." Elena did not argue. She was already moving. The burnt relay box still smoked faintly at her feet, and one of the fence lights had died again, leaving the southern lane in a stuttering half-dark. She crouched, tugged a small screwdriver from the bench, and checked the power feed by touch before the technician could object. "If that vehicle is here for the alert," she said, not looking up, "the gate needs to stay on manual backup. Don't cycle the main line yet." The technician hesitated, glancing at Stein. Stein's jaw tightened. "Why should we listen to you?" he asked. It was not a challenge meant for the recruits anymore. It was a real question, sharp with suspicion and fear. Before Elena could answer, a warning chirped from the monitor. The dark vehicle had shifted position, angled now toward the service lane, as if measuring the weak points in the perimeter. One of the MPs raised his rifle a little higher. Another stepped sideways to cover the command post door. Elena stood up in one smooth motion and crossed to the map board. She did not point at the vehicle. She pointed at the blind spot behind the generator shed. "They're not here to rush the front gate," she said. "They're checking whether your cameras still see that corner." Stein looked from her finger to the screen, and for the first time his expression changed from authority to calculation. A second later, the far fence lights flickered dead, one after another, as if something had just cut the line from outside. The nearest recruit swore under his breath. The technician lunged for the breaker panel, but Elena reached it first, braced her palm against the metal, and pulled the manual lever before the system could collapse completely. The backup circuit caught. Not cleanly. Not perfectly, but enough. The South Service Road remained visible. Enough for everyone to see the two figures now standing beside the unmarked vehicle, one of them lifting a hand in a slow, deliberate signal. No one spoke. Then Elena made a choice that changed the shape of the room. She picked up the radio from the command table and handed it to Stein. "If they came for me," she said quietly, "then you need to let me answer." Stein stared at her, then at the dark road, then back at the people waiting for him to decide. The recruits had stopped smirking hours ago. Now even the loud ones were silent, watching her like she had just stepped out of a place none of them understood. Stein took the radio. He did not give an order. He simply stepped aside. Elena keyed the mic, and before she could speak, the lead figure by the vehicle called out her name like it had been written in a file no one on the base was ever meant to see. "Beck," the voice said. "We're running out of time." Elena did not move until Stein's hand closed around the radio, and even then she kept her eyes on the dark road beyond the fence. The unmarked vehicle sat there like a held breath, its headlights off, its engine ticking softly in the cooling air. Then the voice came again from the driver's side, calm and flat as a clipped command. Beck, you have 30 seconds. A second man stepped into view beside him, older, broader, holding a hard case in both hands. No insignia, no salute, just the kind of posture that made the MPs stop pretending they owned the gate. Stein lifted the radio, but before he could answer, Elena reached out and touched the side of the command table, where a paper roster had been left under a clipboard. Her fingers paused on one line, then moved one row down. She wasn't looking for her own name. She was checking who else had been assigned to the range before dawn. One of the recruits saw it and frowned, then followed her gaze to an empty slot marked with a faded handwritten note. The note had been crossed out, rewritten, and crossed out again. No one asked why she cared. They only watched as she tore the page free, folded it once, and slipped it into her pocket like evidence. Open the gate, she said. Stein blinked. That's an order? No, she answered, still watching the road. That's the only way we keep this from getting worse. The younger officer started to protest, but the older figure at the vehicle raised one hand, and the entire line of MPs froze as if someone had cut the power to their voices. Elena took 3 steps forward, stopped at the fence, and waited. The man with the hard case looked at her once, then set it down on the pavement and opened it just enough for the interior light to spill out. Inside was a sealed folder and a slim black device with a red indicator already blinking. Stein saw it and went rigid. Whatever was in that case was not meant for a training base, not meant for a public range, and certainly not meant for 20 recruits who had spent the morning laughing at the wrong woman. Elena did not reach for the case. She pointed instead toward the command post. If you brought that here, she said, then something else is already moving. No one answered her. That silence was worse than a denial. Behind her, the recruits shifted their weight and looked at one another, no longer curious about how well she shot, but why her face had gone so still. Stein finally lowered the radio. His voice came out rough. What did you just recognize? Elena's jaw tightened, and for the first time since the vehicle arrived, she looked less like a mystery and more like a decision. A countdown, she said. Then the red indicator in the open case changed from steady blink to solid light, and the man at the fence spoke into his mic with a voice that reached them all. Package is live. We need her moving now. Elena did not reach for the case. She stepped around it instead, moved to the open tailgate of the unmarked vehicle, and took the microphone from Stein's hand as if it had already been assigned to her. Move the recruits back, she said, eyes fixed on the red light glowing inside the hard case. Stein hesitated only a beat before snapping the order, and that hesitation changed the whole base. The instructors saw it. The MPs saw it. The recruits saw it most of all. The woman they had mocked for hours was no longer being spoken to like a trainee. She was being used like a problem the command post could not solve without her. One of the men at the fence opened the case wider, and Elena's gaze sharpened on the device inside. Not a weapon, not a bomb, a field unit. Old, military grade, and still active, with a pulsing indicator that looked far too much like a live beacon. She reached in, stopped just short, then pulled her hand back and pointed at the side panel. If you cut power now, you lose the signal, she said. If you leave it on, you invite company. No one argued, because the man with the case had already gone pale. He looked past her, then at Stein, then back at Elena like he was trying to remember when he had last seen someone this calm in front of a live countdown. Stein lowered the radio and made a decision that cost him his authority in front of everyone. You're on point, he said. For a second the range went still. Elena did not smile. She only accepted the role with a nod and started issuing orders before anyone could reclaim control. She told the MPs where to block the service road, told the instructors to clear the line, told one of the medics to bring an oxygen kit and a trauma bag from the training clinic. Then she pointed at the tall antenna on the command post roof. Kill that feed. The comms officer frowned. That is not your call. Elena looked at him once, and the man's voice died in his throat. It is if the package is using your network to breathe. That was the first crack in the story everyone thought they understood. The command post complied. The lights on the case flickered once, then steadied, and Elena finally stepped closer, fingers moving with a precision that made the older man beside the vehicle lean in without thinking. She did something small, almost invisible, a sequence of checks across the housing, the latch, the seal. Then the red light changed again. One short pulse. Then 3. Every face around her tightened. Stein recognized the pattern first, and when he did not speak. He just looked at her like the answer had been standing in front of him the whole time. Elena closed the case halfway and said, "It is not a signal. It is a dead man's handoff." The man at the fence exhaled hard, as if he had been waiting for someone to say exactly that. He raised his mic and gave a clipped response Elena had clearly expected. "Copy. Secondary is moving." Behind the fence line, a second unmarked vehicle appeared on the service road, then a third, each one slowing without headlights, each one carrying people who did not waste a second looking at the recruits. They looked only at Elena. The room she had never asked to enter was now shifting around her, and the weight of it landed hard when the older man finally said, low enough for only her to hear, "You know what that means." Elena did not answer him. She was already watching the tree line beyond the road where the dark began to move in a way the wind could not explain. Then the base alarm sounded once, sharp and clean, and every head turned as a second voice came over the command net. Unidentified approach, northwest perimeter. 6 minutes out. Elena shut the case with a quiet click. The sound was small. Everything after it was not. She looked at Stein, then at the MPs, then at the recruits who had gone rigid in place. And for the first time, there was no mystery left in her posture, only burden. "Now you believe me," she said. And before anyone could answer, she was already walking toward the command post, because whatever was coming next was no longer waiting for permission. Elena reached the command post without breaking stride, but the moment she stepped inside, the room changed around her. Maps still glowed across the table. Radios still crackled. Yet every man in the room now watched her hands. Stein pointed to the open case on the counter, where the red indicator was still burning steady and calm, like a heartbeat nobody wanted to hear. "We need a route," he said. Elena did not waste a second on the obvious answer. She crossed to the wall display, pulled a marker from the tray, and began marking the service lanes, the drainage cut, and the blind corner near the old maintenance shed. Her movements were fast, exact, and strangely gentle, like she was laying out a path for something fragile, not dangerous. One of the younger officers started to question the angle she had chosen, then stopped when she placed a finger on the fence line and shifted the route 2 inches north. That small correction mattered. Outside, an armored vehicle later rolled through the exact gap she had left open, and the driver never even had to brake. The officer's mouth tightened, and without being told, he handed her the radio map and stepped back. It was the first time anyone in the room had done that without being asked. But when Elena turned the page beneath the map, a folded inventory sheet slipped free. It was old, water-stained, and marked with a unit number that made Stein go still for a fraction of a second before he covered it with his hand. Elena saw the motion. So did the captain beside him. No one said the number out loud, but the silence said enough. She did not chase it. She folded the sheet once, set it on the table, and kept working. That choice changed the room more than any confession could have. The MPs stopped hovering near the door and began checking the perimeter exactly where she pointed. The recruits outside, who had been whispering moments earlier, went quiet as they watched her move from monitor to monitor, correcting blind spots the command staff had missed. When the first perimeter call came in, she answered before Stein could. Her voice stayed low, steady, and flat, but every word landed like it had been earned somewhere far from this base. "Keep the north gate closed. Do not send anyone into the tree line yet." Stein looked at her, then at the screen, then back at her. For the first time, he did not ask why. He just nodded. That should have been the end of it. For one brief, dangerous minute, the base almost felt under control. The red indicator in the case kept blinking. The alarm line held. The soldiers moved where she placed them. Then a second sound cut through the quiet, smaller than the alarm, but sharper. The secure printer by the side desk came alive and spat out a single sheet of paper, then another, then 3 more, all stamped with a clearance header that no one in the room was supposed to see. The captain reached for the top page, saw the heading, and froze. Elena had already turned toward the printer before anyone else moved. Her face did not change, but her shoulders did, just slightly, as if she had felt a hand close around something she had spent years trying to keep buried. Stein read the first line and slowly lowered the page. Then he looked at her, not with suspicion now, but with the kind of caution men use when they realize they may have been wrong about the most important thing in the room. "Beck," he said quietly. This just got bigger. Elena took the page from his hand, and for the first time all night, she did not look at the road, or the fence, or the case. She looked at the name printed at the top of the document. Then she shut her eyes for one brief second, opened them again, and reached for the mic outside. Something moved beyond the perimeter lights. Inside, the printer kept feeding paper, and the header on the next sheet made every person in the command post go silent at once. Elena did not wait for the room to understand the page in Stein's hand. She was already moving, one sharp step to the radio, one hand on the mic, the other flattening the printed route across the table. "Close the east lane," she said, eyes on the map, not on the men around her. "If you funnel them through there, you will lose the perimeter in under a minute." Stein did not argue. He only reached for the wall phone and relayed the order with a clipped, immediate authority that had not been in his voice an hour ago. Outside, the printer kept feeding sheet after sheet, and on the top of the next page, the same red-marked header looked back at her like a wound that had never fully healed. Elena slid a finger along the route, stopped at a narrow service cut behind the maintenance block, and tapped once. "Use that." Quiet entry. No headlights. No radio chatter. A lieutenant stared at her, then at Stein, waiting for permission. Stein gave it with a single nod, and that was the first real confirmation in the room. The plan was hers now. Boots moved. Chairs scraped. Men who had been waiting for instructions were suddenly following hers. Elena reached for the open case, not to take it this time, but to turn it toward the table lamp. Inside, beneath the red indicator, the familiar black snake mark sat against the inner lining, and one of the younger officers saw it, then looked at her as if a lock had finally turned. "Black Viper," he said under his breath. No one corrected him. Elena did not look up. She was already marking a second route, tighter, riskier, built for the kind of time no one ever got enough of. When the first distant light shifted beyond the perimeter, she snapped the marker cap shut and handed the map to Stein. "If they breach the east lane, send them to me, not the gate," she said. He took the paper, but this time he held it like something breakable. The movement at the fence line grew clearer, a pair of shadows cutting through the wash of the floodlights, and the room tightened around one shared breath. Then the man at the far end of the command post, the one who had been silent since the first warning, stepped forward with the next sheet from the printer in his hand. He read 2 lines, then lowered it slowly, his face changed by what it said. "Confirmation just came through," he said. "The package is tied to the old red line file." No one spoke. Elena's hand paused on the edge of the table for the smallest moment, then kept moving, because the choice in front of her was no longer about what they knew, but what she was willing to do with the truth now exposed. She took the radio back, keyed it once, and gave the order that made every man in the room move at the same time. "Get the convoy ready," she said. "If this goes live, I am the one who walks it out." Stein turned toward her, the weight of the words landing on him before anyone else. He did not challenge her. He stepped aside and opened the door himself. For the first time that night, the room made space for Elena instead of trying to contain her. She crossed the threshold with the route in one hand and the red-lit case in the other, and as she reached the dark edge of the command post, a voice from outside called her name again, softer this time, almost careful. It was not fear in the sound. It was recognition. Elena stopped at the door, looked once over her shoulder at the men now waiting on her next move, and gave the smallest nod. Then she stepped into the night, where the headlights were gathering, and whatever came next would have to answer to her. The headlights reached the edge of the command post and held there, washing the windows in a pale white glow that made everyone inside look older, quieter, and suddenly honest. Elena was already outside, one hand on the red-lit case, the other on the folded route, standing in the cold with her face turned toward the convoy, as if she had been waiting for it all her life. Behind her, Stein opened the door wider and let the rest of the room come out one by one, not as a crowd now, but as men who knew enough to stop getting in the way. No one spoke first. They did not need to. One of the younger officers took the printed route from the table and carried it out to the lead SUV without being asked. Another reached back inside, grabbed the radio charger, and brought it to Elena with both hands, holding it out the way people hold something fragile and important. She did not look at the gesture for long. She only took the charger, clipped it onto the radio, and checked the battery like she was preparing a life and not a machine. Then she handed the route to Stein. He looked at it, then at her, and finally nodded once before turning to his team and placing the pages into the hands that had once mocked her silence. The change did not arrive as applause. It arrived as work. Doors opened faster. Helmets were set down more carefully. Voices dropped into a cleaner rhythm. Someone moved a crate without being told. Someone else cleared the path to the ramp and stayed there until the convoy leader stepped forward. Even the air seemed to loosen, as if the whole place had been holding its breath and only now remembered how to release it. Elena walked the line of vehicles without ceremony, stopping beside each open door long enough to look at the men inside. She did not give them a speech. She checked their hands, their seat belts, the placement of the med kit, the radio channel, the seal on the case. Each small motion pulled the night into order. At the last SUV, the youngest soldier in the row reached up and, after a beat of hesitation, laid a thin black patch on the seat beside her route map. It was not a salute. It was better than that. It was a promise to carry what she had carried alone. Elena's eyes stayed on the patch for a moment longer than the others noticed. Then she closed her fingers over it and tucked it into the inside pocket of her jacket. When she climbed into the lead vehicle, no one rushed her. No one tried to speak over her. The engine turned. The convoy lights came alive one by one. And for a brief second the entire line of vehicles stood still in perfect readiness, as if waiting on a single breath from her. She gave it by lowering her hand. The convoy moved. As they rolled past the perimeter, Stein remained by the gate, one hand raised not in ceremony, but in that quiet way of saying goodbye to someone who had already given too much. Elena looked back once through the rear window. The command post was smaller now, but the men outside were not. They stood straighter in the spill of the headlights, each of them holding the night a little differently than before. Near the back seat, the black patch rested against her jacket like a shadow that had finally found its home. She pressed it once with her thumb, then turned her face forward as the road opened ahead. By the time the convoy disappeared into the dark, the first sign of morning had begun to thin the horizon, and the road behind them seemed less like an ending than a beginning left gently in the hands of everyone who would follow. The convoy had already vanished into the pale edge of morning when Elena returned to the temporary shelter line at the edge of the compound, moving without hurry, one hand still resting lightly on the black patch pinned inside her jacket. The first trailer door was open. A cot had been set near a folding table, and a paper cup of coffee sat untouched beside a stack of triage forms. She crossed the gravel lot, picked up the pen someone had left behind, and began writing names back into order. No one told her to do it. No one needed to. A few of the men from the command post came in behind her, quiet now, carrying blankets, bottled water, and the kind of small supplies people only remember after the danger has passed. Stein stopped at the entrance, watched for a moment, then turned and lifted a box from the floor before setting it beside the door where anyone limping in from the road could reach it without asking. Inside the trailer, one of the younger soldiers knelt to help an old mechanic tape a torn sleeve. Another moved a chair closer to the heat. Elena never looked up long enough to make it a scene. She just kept writing, checking, sorting, and every so often sliding a fresh cup of coffee towards someone whose hands were shaking from exhaustion rather than fear. When the last form was filled, she stood, pressed the cap onto the pen, and tucked it behind the clipboard with the same careful motion she had used on the rifle before dawn. By then the light had changed. The convoy had left tire marks in the mud, and the marks were already fading at the edges as the sun climbed higher. Outside, the line of vehicles was gone, but the people they had left behind were no longer standing in the same way. One man at the edge of the lot lowered his voice before speaking to a frightened teenager. Another quietly handed his jacket to a woman who had been standing too long in the cold. Nobody announced the change. It simply moved from one set of hands to another. Elena stepped back outside and saw a service truck parked near the generator shed, its rear door hanging open. A young corporal was struggling with a broken strap on a supply crate, one knee in the dirt, jaw tight with the kind of stubborn concentration she recognized immediately. She walked over, took the strap from his hands, looped it once, then twice, and tightened it until the latch sat flush. He looked up to thank her, but she was already glancing past him at the stack of medical cases waiting in the dust. One of them had come loose during unloading. She bent, lifted it onto her shoulder, and carried it toward the trailer without calling attention to the weight. Behind her, the corporal picked up the strap she had fixed and used it on the next crate without hesitation. By the time she reached the doorway, someone had set out more chairs in a straighter line than before. The black patch in her jacket caught a strip of sunlight as she paused just once at the threshold. She touched it, not as a farewell, but as if checking that it was still there, then stepped inside and set the medical case down beside the table. The trailer door stayed open. The morning air moved through it. And when Elena reached for the pen again, the room around her settled into the calm rhythm of people who had learned, quietly, how to keep going.